If you love coffee, if you love espresso or chocolate, if you love citrus, if you love Chardonnay, if you love champagne, there's a beer that has those characteristics and more. And so that becomes a kind of challenge. You don't like beer? Oh yeah? You tasted them all yet? We haven't been afraid to cross national boundaries in borrowing our brewing traditions.
And so we've rediscovered all these styles that were dominant styles of the 19th century in Belgium, in Germany, in Czechoslovakia, in England, Scotland, Wales. The last porter brewed in England, I believe it was 1972. And the style pretty much vanished from its country of birth. However, this was also the time when we were having all these new brewers starting, like Ken Grossman of Sierra Nevada, who had traveled Europe, tasted some of the European styles, and came back and had started home brewing and doing some, research into beer styles and whatever, and we're discovering some of these old styles that had vanished, and we're starting to make them as home brewers. And then, of course, that magical question that so many of the early brewers heard, hey, do you think you can make a living brewing this? And I swear to God, that's the birth of the American craft brewing industry, is people traveling to Europe, discovering old styles or reading about them and discovering old styles, homebrewing them, and some clown saying to them, you should make a living.
You should go pro.
Yeah, and you look at all of these breweries and you'll find that a large number of them, the old ones, that's how they began.
There was a time when newspapers suddenly started running columns about wine, and they'd run a column about wine every week because people wanted to learn about wine. And at that time, I thought, well, wait a minute. The wine of the country in the United Kingdom and in the United States too, the wine of the country is beer. And why aren't we talking about beer? Beer was the drink that I grew up with and that I love the most, and I went into and fought for it. And in doing so, I was perhaps fighting for the underdog. I've been quite widely credited with having invented the language of taste for beer, and although I'm flattered to be for this to be said about me, I'm not really sure that's true. When I started writing about beer, there wasn't really a language, but the language I used was very often just common parlance. Just as a wine can be light or thin or dry, or it can be heavy or full-bodied or sweet. Those sorts of terms which are just taken from everyday language. And in fact, most of the terminology that is applied to wine can be applied to beer. On the other hand, you don't get very, very many wines that are hoppy. I've been in a plane on my way to Seattle or Portland, Oregon, and you get chatting to the guy sitting next to you, and he's whatever he is, a lawyer or a surgeon or something. What do you do for a living? I try to explain what I do for a living. And he says, well, so why are you, what are you doing in Seattle? What are you doing in Portland? I said, well, Seattle is one of the world's greatest beer cities. Portland has more breweries than any other city in the world. Oh, gee, I didn't know that. How long have you been living in Portland? Oh, I've been living here all my life. It's inconceivable that you would be landing in Bordeaux and somebody wouldn't know that their city was a pretty important wine city. There was once a trade delegation from the state of Washington came to London, and they made a presentation in the American Embassy in Grosvenor Square. Fantastic building, huge imposing building, demonstrates the power and the glory of the United States, and here they are telling us about the power and the glory of Washington State, and what great oysters it has and coffee it has, what great wine it has. No mention of beer. You know, and I put my hand up and said, you know, I'm from London, England, but I think you'll find that Seattle, Washington's a pretty good beer town. And I might as well have farted, you know, I mean. One department where beer particularly scores over wine, and people are always very surprised at this particular suggestion, but is the dessert department. Beers go very well with desserts if you've got the right beer and the right dessert. Of course, a lot of fruit beers being made these days, very much inspired by beers from Belgium, but being made all over the US, some outstanding fruit beers, very often made with cherries. So can she bake a cherry pie? Are we going to have cherry jubilee? Yes, cherry desserts, cherry beers, pretty good combination. Several types of dark beer that are sweet rather than roasty will go wonderfully well with anything that contains chocolate, especially very bitter chocolate. Chocolate brown is death by chocolate. I'm a bit of a chocoholic, so I just love that. This would be pretty good with a very dark chocolate dessert. It would be even better as a beer at bedtime, I think, on a cold night, when, especially if the rain is hammering against your window panes and you're in a nice big comfortable leather chair and your wife's gone to bed, you just got a bit of peace for a while, just have a little beer and read a bit or watch TV or something. Just a little quiet time.
Well, when I bought into the brewery, I had control, I had a partner. And I thought, we talked about the company and what could I do to help. I didn't see myself as the boss. I saw myself as an angel who would just help a little and then stand back. And we talked about the company and what we thought we needed, and it was obvious that we needed sales. You can always say that about almost any company. And so I went out into the world here in San Francisco trying to sell the beer. And I would go into a restaurant and introduce myself and say, I'm one of the owners of the Anchor Steam Beer Brewery, and I'd like to know if you'd like to try our beer. And often they would look at me and say, you can't be the owner. They went bankrupt years ago. And I realized we had a terrible problem. Even here in our hometown, people thought we'd disappeared long before. We transformed this medieval brewery in a period of about 4 or 5 years, from probably the most primitive brewery in the world to certainly the most modern small brewery in the world. By the early 70s, we were all stainless steel except the copper brew house, all cleaned in place, centrifuge instead of filtration, flash pasteurized, aseptically bottled, all malt, naturally carbonated. It was a bizarre combination of modern technology, modern cleanliness and temperature control, and high quality food processing equipment and systems, combined with a radically traditionalist point of view in terms of how the beer was brewed and what it was brewed from. We were absolute purists. It was a long struggle, frankly. For a long time, we sold only at very unusual places and only a few number of people. But the trend was terrific, you see. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about a trend that's compounding. You can start small, but if you get a little time, it'll grow. And word of mouth caught on, began to spread the word. And of course, San Francisco, that's one of our secrets. People come here from all over the world. And locally, San Franciscans are proud of their own history, like everyone is all over the world. And so we had an advantage. Restaurants, bars, hotels would put our beer in because it was local. And then people from all over the country and all over the world would hear about it and see it here